If you ever saw them on the sidewalk, you'd probably look once, maybe twice, and move on. Just an old man with a white cane walking beside a slow-moving German shepherd. Harmless, ordinary, familiar even. But if you stopped long enough, if you really watched, you'd notice something strange. The way the dog never once sniffed a hydrant or chased a squirrel. The way he walked half a step ahead of the man, never behind. The way his eyes, graying with age, didn't wander, but locked dead ahead, like a soldier watching a front line that no one else could see. And if you had eyes that really saw, you'd know what most missed. That dog wasn't on a walk. He was on duty. Joseph Murphy's apartment sat on the third floor of an aging brick complex in East Hamilton, a quiet stretch of town just past the railroad tracks. His windows stayed shut. His mailbox never overflowed. The hallway always smelled like lemon polish and old paperbacks. Most neighbors didn't know his name, but those who did, especially the mailman and the kids at the local library, called him Mr. Joe. Joseph was 78, thin, neatly dressed in pressed slacks, in a sweater no matter the weather. His silver hair combed straight back, a quiet man, a private man, and completely blind. For 34 years, he hadn't seen a sunrise, a crosswalk, or a human face. The jungle had taken his sight back in '79 after a special forces op went wrong. Infection from a mosquito bite, they said, something that slowly ate away his corneas like moths on cloth. But ask Joseph, and he wouldn't say he was alone in the dark. He'd say he still saw the world, just not with his eyes. That's because of Shadow. Shadow was an old German shepherd, once a military canine, now retired. But retired didn't mean relaxed, not for him. He never played fetch, never chased his tail. He didn't even rest unless Joseph was safe. His coat had grayed around the muzzle and his gait had stiffened. But those amber eyes still burned bright, and his ears still perked at every change in the wind. Shadow didn't just follow commands, he anticipated them. He didn't guide Joseph, he guarded him. That morning, the world felt off. It wasn't the temperature mild for September. It wasn't the traffic quiet as usual on Elman Street. But something in the air hummed, a kind of tension. Shadow felt it before the kettle had finished whistling. Joseph stood from his chair, slowly tapping his cane twice along the floor, before making his way toward the kitchen. As always, Shadow rose immediately, nudging Joseph's knee gently like clockwork, then moving to his side, ready to guide. It was a routine rehearsed over years down to the exact breath. As Joseph poured hot water into the mug, Shadow didn't lay down as usual. He stood posture stiff, head slightly tilted toward the front door. "Something bothering you, buddy?" Joseph asked, sensing the change. Shadow didn't answer. He never did. But his body was saying everything. A low wind stirred the curtains. Outside, the world was still too still. They didn't talk like a pet and owner. They were more than that, more than friends, more than partners. They were soldiers. Shadow had served beside Joseph in Southeast Asia, found during a mission abandoned and half dead beneath a tree root. Joseph had carried him 4 kilometers back to base, wrapped in a field jacket. Shadow never left his side again. Not then, not after the discharge, not now. At 9:07 a.m., Joseph finished his tea, put on his coat, and reached for the leash that hung near the door like a quiet promise. The cane was already tucked in his inner pocket. He didn't need instructions. His fingers found the clip and snapped it on in one clean motion. "All right, my friend," he said softly. "Let's take our walk." Shadow gave one gentle wag. That was his version of ready. Outside, the city hadn't quite woken up. A few joggers, a couple of students on bikes. The sidewalk still glistened from a light drizzle the night before. The bakery's warm scent of croissants drifted from the corner, and someone's radio murmured about traffic delays on Route 12. They passed the almond tree where Shadow always stopped to sniff the air. They walked by the corner pharmacy where Joseph could identify the store hours printed on the glass just by the texture of the paint. But something still felt off. Shadow's steps were heavier. His ears moved more. His tail, usually low and calm, twitched as if reading some signal Joseph couldn't perceive. "Shadow," Joseph whispered, "you're doing that thing again." The dog paused, glancing back just once. Joseph smiled. "Right, I know. You always see it before I do." Midway down the block, a mother and child passed them. The little boy waved. "Hi, puppy." Shadow didn't react. Not out of rudeness, out of discipline. He only acknowledged children after Joseph gave the go-ahead. A rule forged in war zones where distractions got soldiers killed. Joseph raised his hand. "Go ahead." Shadow stepped to the child, let him pet his head gently, then returned immediately to position. The mother smiled. That dog's better trained than my husband. Joseph chuckled. That's not a high bar. Laughter echoed down the street. If you're enjoying this story and want more real-life tales of courage, loyalty, and love between animals and humans, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel Heroes for Animals. These stories need to be heard and remembered. Back on the sidewalk, Joseph and Shadow approached the Red Brick Library. On Tuesdays and Fridays, Joseph read to the kids in the children's room. Not because he was asked, but because he believed stories could change hearts, especially when told by someone who listened better than he saw. Shadow entered first. He always did. He stopped at the threshold, turned, and waited for Joseph to follow. Inside the children's room smelled of crayons, soft carpet, and apple juice. Kids already sat in a semicircle, some holding library cards like tickets to wonder. Hi, Mr. Joe. Hi, Shadow. Joseph nodded, feeling their little hands reach out. He took his usual wooden chair. Shadow lay at his feet, but not like a normal dog. His ears remained up. His eyes tracked every doorway. He wasn't there to nap. He was there to protect the story. As Joseph began, his voice warmed. Once upon a time, there lived a turtle who was old, slow, and wise. The kids leaned in. They giggled when he did voices, gasped when he added suspense. In Shadow, he listened too. When the story turned happy, his tail thumped lightly against the floor. When it turned sad, his ears lowered like dusk. Lily, the little girl from downstairs, came in late, breathless. She ran up and hugged Shadow. He still remembers me, right? Shadow licked her cheek, then settled again. Joseph tilted his head. I think he remembers you better than you remember yourself. A child asked, how does Shadow understand the stories? Joseph paused. Because he listens with his heart, he said, and hearts don't need words. They only need to know what's real. Silence fell over the room. Not the bored kind, the sacred kind. And in that silence, none of them knew that this very same dog, the one laying quietly at Joseph's feet, would within days be forced to face a threat no one saw coming. He wouldn't growl. He wouldn't run. But he would make the greatest choice a warrior can make, to stand between his master and the danger ahead, even if it meant never walking back again. For Joseph Murphy, every Friday morning was sacred. Not religious, not ceremonial, but sacred in the way old soldiers treat patterns, precise, quiet, unshaken. 7:15 a.m. Wake up, 7:30 a.m. Boil tea, 7:50 a.m. Clip on Shadow's leash, 8:05 a.m. Step outside, 9:30 a.m. Return. He didn't need a watch. The world told him what time it was, the feel of the floor tiles, the hush of traffic outside, the subtle groan of the plumbing in the unit above him. Even the birds kept a kind of rhythm he'd learned to listen to. And Shadow didn't just keep time. He was time. Every motion of that old shepherd's body moved like a second hand, steady and exact. That Friday began no differently. Joseph brushed his teeth, tied his boots, and stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding the kettle just as it clicked to a boil. Shadow had already nudged the rug back into place, pushed the cane closer to the door, and was now standing by the window, staring motionless. That's when Joseph noticed it again. The stillness. The kind that doesn't feel calm. The kind that makes the back of your neck tighten for no reason you can name. Buddy, he said softly, you're doing that thing again. Shadow didn't flinch. Joseph reached down to clip the leash. Shadow didn't move. Not out of defiance, never, but out of something older, deeper. The kind of instinct animals follow when storms are coming or predators are near. Joseph had learned long ago, if Shadow freezes, you pay attention. Still, the routine was everything. They had never missed a Friday walk. Not once. By 8:12 a.m., they were on the sidewalk, heading toward Elman Street, the same way they had gone hundreds of times before. The bakery owner waved from inside. A jogger nodded. Nothing seemed off except the silence inside Shadow. He wasn't scanning the sidewalk. He wasn't wagging like he usually did when Lily would run out to say hi. His eyes were forward, narrowed, his body low to the ground, his ears still. Something had changed. As they approached the intersection at Elman and 3rd, a wide crosswalk lined with oak trees and traffic cameras, Shadow slowed to a complete stop. Joseph tapped his cane once, then again. Forward, he said. Nothing. Shadow, still nothing. The dog's body stiffened, legs locked in place. His eyes were fixed across the street, not at a squirrel or a trash bin, but at something Joseph couldn't see. The walk signal chirped 3 short beeps, safe to cross. Still, Shadow didn't move. That had never happened. Not in 11 years, not in snow, not during thunder, Not when a motorcycle backfired so loudly it startled three adults on the sidewalk. Never. Joseph tilted his head slightly. A tiny breeze brushed past his face. Scentless, cool, but sharp. Then without turning his head, Joseph whispered, "You feel that too, don't you?" Shadow's ears lowered slightly. His tail curled down, but his body didn't move. Something wasn't right across that street. But what? Meanwhile, parked just off the opposite curb half a block away behind the row of recycling bins, a black and white police cruiser sat idling. Inside were two young officers sipping burnt drive-through coffee and scrolling through their phones. Officer Miller, 24, broad-shouldered ex-football star, turned beat cop, looked up. "There's our guy again," he muttered. "Old blind vet, right on schedule." His partner Davis, just 22, and barely out of academy training, looked up too. "That's the one with the service dog, right?" "Yeah, big one. Looks like he could eat a kid whole." Davis glanced at the dog. "He's just standing there." Miller shrugged, probably waiting for the voices in his head to say go. Davis didn't laugh. Something about the way the old man stood the leash, slack, his body calm but uncertain, didn't sit right. "You think we should, I don't know, just drive on?" "Nah," Miller said, reaching for the cruiser's PA mic. "Watch this." The speaker crackled across the intersection. "Step off the street. Lights are about to change." Joseph jerked slightly. His fingers tightened around the leash. To a blind man, that kind of voice, sudden, disembodied, sharp, wasn't just loud. It was disorienting. It made the world spin. Shadow immediately stepped in front of him, pressing his body against Joseph's shin. Not aggressive, protective. Joseph frowned, listening to the air. The beeping continued. Shadow still wouldn't move. "Sir," the voice came again. "You need to cross or clear the intersection." But Joseph wasn't in the intersection. He was on the curb. His feet hadn't moved. The light was still in his favor. Then it happened to honk. Loud, close, angry. Someone in a gray sedan had grown impatient and slammed the horn as they rolled toward the crosswalk. Shadow whipped around. One bark, short, sharp, controlled. Joseph reached out. "Shadow, what is it?" The dog didn't move. Inside the cruiser, Miller tossed his coffee cup onto the dash. "That's obstruction. We could cite him." "Cite a blind man," Davis said quietly. "Look," Miller replied, irritation building. "He's blocking the signal. He's not moving, and that dog doesn't have any muzzle or reflective gear. Could be dangerous." Davis bit his lip. "You sure?" "We've got every reason. Look it up. Public obstruction, non-compliance, it's textbook." Joseph took a slow step back, unsure now where he was in space. He tilted his head, trying to recenter. And Shadow, he moved with him, matching every inch. Then came a long blast from the cruiser's horn. And that was it. Shadow snapped. Not into aggression, but into protection. He spun around, positioned himself fully in front of Joseph, his back legs braced, tail stiff, head low. To most, it looked like a dog just refusing to move. But to Joseph, through the subtle tremble in the leash, the sudden intake of breath from Shadow, it meant one thing. Danger. "I don't understand," Joseph murmured. "What are you sensing?" No one on the street knew what was really happening. Not yet. But Shadow did. He had felt it before in the jungle during raids when the air would grow too quiet right before an ambush. He had sensed it behind rubble and collapsed tunnels and alleyways thick with the scent of gasoline and fear. It wasn't the noise. It was the intent behind it. He could smell it, hear it, feel it. And now it was here in his city, at this intersection, directed at his handler. Miller opened the cruiser door. Davis grabbed his arm. "Wait, just wait. Let's give it a second." But Miller was already stepping out, voice sharp. "Control your dog or I will." Joseph froze. Shadow growled a deep, low sound that wasn't threat but warning. Joseph's voice was barely a whisper. "Talk to me, Shadow. What are you trying to say?" And in that exact moment, something subtle but irreversible shifted. A tension no one could explain. A decision made not in words but in breath. And still, Shadow stood his ground. Between Joseph and the unknown, between routine and rupture, between a peaceful walk and what was now undeniably a silent standoff. The crosswalk signal chirped again, 3 quick beeps followed by a longer tone. For most people, it was just background noise, but for Joseph Murphy, it was everything. That signal was how he knew it was safe to walk, how he judged distance and time, how he moved through a world that had long since gone dark. But that Friday morning, as the beeping echoed through the air and Shadow still refused to move, Joseph felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt, not in the dog, never in Shadow, but in the world around them. He turned his head slightly, listening not just with his ears, but with the finely tuned instinct of a man who had once navigated minefields by smell and vibration. Across the street, he could hear the low hum of an idling engine, a car door clicking open, the hard soles of boots striking pavement. And behind him, Shadow's breathing had changed. It was faster now, not panicked but ready, Shadow Joseph said gently. The leash twitched once in his hand, a signal. Joseph knew it well. Don't move. The dog's body stood firm like a statue made of muscle and breath. Then came the voice again, louder this time, bouncing off concrete and glass like a command from nowhere. Last warning. Control your animal and clear the intersection. It was Officer Miller standing beside the cruiser, hand resting on the taser at his hip. His jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his cap. To him, this wasn't a man and a dog, it was a situation, a delay, a test of his authority. Inside the car, Davis hadn't moved. His hands gripped the steering wheel. His stomach churned. Across the street, Joseph didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply called out, confused and cautious. I'm blind. I'm with a service dog. We're not in the street. Miller didn't respond. He took a step forward, then another. Shadow matched him step for step, closing the distance between his body and Joseph's. Shielding, not aggression, protection. And yet from the outside, it looked like defiance. A black dog, large alert, standing between his handler and a uniformed officer. To a camera phone, it might seem calm. To the wrong person, it looked dangerous. Miller unhooked the taser holster. The device buzzed faintly in his hand. Davis leaned out the window. Miller, wait, what if we just... What? Let him block traffic and bark at cops. He's not barking. Miller ignored him. On the curb, Joseph whispered again, this time to himself. Don't do it, son. Don't do it. But Shadow was already bracing. Behind them, a horn blasted. A second car, impatient, clueless. The world kept moving. And then it happened. Miller shouted, move your dog now. Joseph tried. He reached forward. Shadow heel. But the dog didn't budge. Instead, he growled, not loud, not vicious, but deep. A sound from another life. From jungle nights and burning airstrikes. The kind of sound a K9 makes when it knows something's about to go wrong. And then click. The taser's trigger was pulled. 2 wires snapped forward, trailing hooks like silver teeth. And in the same split second, Shadow moved. He didn't attack. He didn't retreat. He simply stepped into the shot. The probes hit him square in the shoulder. Electricity cracked through his body. His muscles locked. His legs jerked. He collapsed to the pavement leash, pulling hard in Joseph's hand. Shadow Joseph shouted, stumbling forward. His knee hit the ground. His cane skidded out of reach. But he didn't care. He was crawling now, groping along the sidewalk, calling blindly into the chaos. Shadow, come back, buddy, please. Across the intersection, gasps rose from a small group of pedestrians. One woman clutched her chest. A boy, filming with a phone, whispered, oh my God. Shadow lay twitching, his breast short and broken, but his eyes never left Joseph. He watched his handler crawl across the sidewalk, hands trembling, tears streaking down weathered cheeks. And still he didn't close his eyes. Joseph's hand found him pressed against his side, feeling the tremors beneath the fur. No, stay with me. You're all right. You're all right. But Shadow wasn't all right. His body was failing. The electricity had thrown off his heart rhythm. His back legs weren't responding. His breathing was shallow and uneven. Joseph reached for the collar. I'm here, son. You did good. You did everything right. And just as he said those words, something terrible happened. Another sound, a gun being unholstered. Miller's voice was cold now. The leash is still taut. The dog's not down. Possible attack mode. Davis stepped out, panicked. Wait, he's not attacking. He's protecting. Look at him. He's protecting that man. But Miller was already raising the weapon. Joseph lifted a hand. Please don't. He's my eyes. The shot rang out. Not a taser this time. A bullet. And it struck Joseph high in the shoulder, sending him tumbling backward. His body twisted from the impact. His hand slipped from Shadow's side. The world went silent. Then came a scream from someone on the sidewalk. Then another. Then chaos. But Joseph, he didn't hear it. Not fully. All he heard was Shadow's final whimper as the dog pulled his broken frame across the sidewalk to reach him. Crawling inch by inch, front paws dragging his weight. No commands, no strength left. Only love, only loyalty. And then one paw touched Joseph's hand and stilled. The intersection of Elman and 3rd fell quiet. Phones recorded. Cars stopped. A city that hadn't noticed a blind man and his dog just minutes ago now stared in stunned silence. Davis stood frozen. Miller lowered the gun slowly. His face was blank. The boy filming whispered, did he just shoot? Both of them. Joseph's body moved just slightly. He rolled towards Shadow, pulling the limp body close, tucking his face against the dog's neck. "You did good," he whispered through pain. "You did more than I ever asked." Around them, the sounds of sirens began to swell. People were yelling. Someone was calling 911. But in that circle on that concrete, there were just two souls, an old soldier and a dog who had never stopped guarding him. A child nearby began crying. A woman shouted, "They shot a blind man and his service dog in broad daylight." The first video went live on social media within minutes. It didn't need editing. No hashtags, just a single caption. He took the shot meant for his handler. By the time the ambulance arrived, the clip had already hit 1,000 views. By nightfall, it would hit millions. But Joseph wouldn't know that yet. All he knew was the faint thumping heartbeat beneath his hand, and the warmth of a loyal friend still breathing barely because he hadn't been willing to let go. Not yet. No one remembers exactly who screamed first. Maybe it was the woman in workout clothes holding her coffee with trembling hands. Maybe it was the boy who'd been filming and dropped his phone. Maybe it was Joseph himself, though most people watching said it didn't sound like a scream. They said it sounded like something breaking. The kind of sound you don't forget. The intersection of Elman and 3rd, normally a quiet middle-income corner of Hamilton, where parents walked kids to school and teens skateboarded after class, became something else that morning. A crime scene. A war zone, a moment no one could explain. Shadow's body lay motionless across the faded white crosswalk lines, fur twitching slightly from the taser's shock. Joseph Murphy, blood soaking through his left shoulder, curled toward the dog's limp frame, whispering words no one else could hear. All around them, cars stopped mid-turn. People stood on sidewalks like statues. The sun was warm, the sky clear, but the air felt cracked. Across the street, Officer Davis took 2 staggering steps backward. His partner Miller still held the gun in one hand, arms slightly extended, lips parted, chest heaving, like a man who'd just woken up in the middle of someone else's nightmare. Davis opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His stomach twisted, his knees locked. A tightness in his throat made it hard to swallow. The scene didn't look like a suspect down report. It looked like murder. The boy who dropped his phone scrambled to pick it up. It was still recording. Without thinking, he turned it toward the man and dog. And that's when people began filming. Every angle, every cry, every drop of blood. One video caught the moment Joseph reached out his shaking hand and placed it on Shadow's chest. One caught Shadow trying against everything his failing body told him to pull himself closer. Another caught Joseph whispering, "You hear me? You did good. You did more than anyone ever should have had to." The sound of sirens began to rise in the distance. Fast, loud, urgent, but none of them got there first. The first responder on the scene was a woman in a white coat, Marcia Landry, the head nurse from the pharmacy 2 doors down. She'd been on break sipping water behind the counter when she heard the commotion. When she stepped outside, what she saw made her sprint barefoot across the pavement. She dropped to her knees beside Shadow, hands already checking pulse points, eyes wide with disbelief. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, touching the dog's neck gently. "You're still trying. Don't you quit on me." She looked up at Joseph, his face pale, his eyes glassy but open. "He's my dog," Joseph said hoarsely. "He's all I've got." Marcia nodded, pressing her fingers against Shadow's ribs. "We're going to get him help, I promise." By the time the ambulance pulled up, the crowd had doubled. People with phones, people with questions, people with tears in their eyes and outrage in their hands. Among them, a retired Marine named Tom Greeley stood silently, arms crossed, over his Vietnam vet jacket. He didn't record, he didn't yell, he just stared at Shadow. And he whispered, "Not again, not another one." The paramedics moved fast. One rushed to Joseph, cutting away the shirt around his bleeding shoulder. Another kneeled by Shadow with a stretcher. "Pulse is weak," one said. "We need canine transport." "He's not just a dog," Marcia snapped. "He's a soldier. You move him like one." The paramedics nodded. They understood. Together, they lifted Shadow's body gently, one hand under his chest, the other cradling his head. They laid him on the stretcher like a fallen comrade. Joseph reached out, bloodied fingers brushing Shadow's ear as they loaded him in. "I'll see you in there," he whispered. "You hold on." Back on the curb, Officer Davis stood unmoving. Someone finally asked what the hell happened. No answer came. And still, the cameras kept rolling. Within 20 minutes, the footage had made it to Twitter, then Instagram, then TikTok. One video titled "They Shot a Blind Man's K9 at a Crosswalk" reached 100,000 views before the ambulance even arrived at Hamilton Medical. By noon, the phrase "#Justice for Shadow" was trending nationwide. At the hospital, the emergency team worked in silence. Nurses moved around Joseph like clock hands, cutting away torn fabric, cleaning the wound, checking for internal damage. "Vital stable," a doctor muttered. "He's going into shock. Get fluids started." In the next room, a military veterinarian named Jess Park had been called in on special request. She'd treated retired canines before, but none like this. Not one who came in with a bullet wound beside a blind war veteran. Shadow lay on the table, hooked to fluids and monitors, chest rising faintly beneath the worn fur. Jess pressed a stethoscope to his side. Her voice was soft but steady. "You did good, soldier. You held your line." Across the hallway, Joseph stirred. His shoulder burned and the room spun slowly around him. But he didn't ask about his pain. He asked, "Where's my dog?" Marcia took his hand. "He's alive." "Barely. They're doing everything they can." Joseph exhaled. Not relief, something deeper. A release of fear. Of the kind of horror that stays buried under medals, in VA paperwork, and old scars. He said quietly, "He's my reason." Then he closed his eyes. Elsewhere, in a quiet suburban house 20 miles outside of town, an old man named Marcus Landon sat reading on his porch. A retired Army colonel, now 79, he drank black coffee and read headlines about city council races and utility hikes. He had served with Joseph Murphy once, long ago, in a jungle that had swallowed men whole. When his phone buzzed, he didn't recognize the number, but he answered. The voice was trembling. "Colonel Landon, this is Nurse Landry from Hamilton. I think you know a man named Joseph Murphy." 10 minutes later, he was in his truck. By the time he reached the hospital, the entire parking lot had started to fill with people. Not just protesters, veterans, parents with children, blind citizens with canes and harness dogs, signs made in marker and chalk. "He served us. We failed him." That dog was his vision. Protect the protectors. Inside, the waiting room was quiet but full. A woman in a wheelchair held a folded flag in her lap. A boy held up a phone showing the video of Shadow crawling toward Joseph after the shot. No one spoke loud. There was no shouting. Only grief. Only awe. Only the kind of silence that means we see now. We didn't, but we do now. Colonel Landon walked to the front desk. "I'm here for Joseph Murphy and Shadow," he said. The receptionist looked up, eyes wide. "You're not the first." By early evening, the mayor of Hamilton called a press conference. His voice shook when he stepped to the podium. "What happened this morning was a tragedy, a failure, and we are launching a full investigation." He paused. "This city owes a debt, not just to Joseph Murphy, but to every man, woman, and service animal who gave their loyalty without hesitation." And across the country, people listened. They watched the video. They cried. They called their local officials. They hugged their dogs. And that night, across from Hamilton, medical candles were lit on the sidewalk. Dozens of them, little lights in glass jars flickering softly against the dark. A photo sat between them, a black and tan German Shepherd, alert and proud, standing beside an older man with sunglasses and a cane. Below it, one line, "He never once left his post." The first night in the hospital passed slowly. The hallways felt heavier than usual, as if even the lights above had dimmed out of respect. In room 312, Joseph Murphy lay in a hospital bed, bandages wrapped tight across his shoulder. Tubes ran from his arm to a clear IV bag that swayed gently every time the HVAC kicked on. Machines clicked, beeped, hummed. But Joseph wasn't listening to them. He was listening for a breath. One hallway down, in a separate room with dim lights and padded floors, Shadow lay curled on a surgical pad. His fur was still damp from the alcohol swabs used to prep his chest. A shaved patch showed singed skin from the taser. Bandages wrapped his midsection where the wires had left their mark. His breath was shallow, his heartbeat slow but steady. A nurse sat silently beside him, stroking between his ears with a light touch. They had turned off the overhead lights so he could rest easier. No one spoke much in that room. They didn't have to. By Saturday morning, the story had reached every corner of the country. On Facebook, the video of the shooting had over 3.2 million views. On TikTok, a clip of Shadow collapsing beside Joseph was tagged in a wave of support. Shadow strong. He took the shot, Canine hero. People were posting photos of their own dogs with captions like, "We see you, we thank you, and this is what loyalty looks like." In Sacramento, a group of blind veterans organized a walk to their city hall in silence. In Nashville, a retired K-9 unit handler offered to pay for Shadow's recovery costs, even if it meant selling his car. In New York, Central Park joggers paused their routes to lay flowers beneath the statue of Balto. And in Hamilton, candles still burned, A folding table had been placed outside the hospital covered in cards and notes, crayon drawings from school children, handwritten letters from strangers. A man in a wheelchair brought an old army medal and left it beneath a framed photo of Joseph in shadow. One note written in bold Sharpie read, he couldn't see the danger. So the dog did, and took it for him. Inside the hospital, Joseph finally woke again. His first words were not about his wound. Did Shadow make it through the night? Marcia Landry, the nurse who hadn't left his side, nodded softly. He's still here, Mr. Murphy. Barely, but he's here. Joseph tried to sit up, wincing at the fire shooting through his arm. I need to see him, he said. Soon, Marcia promised. They're keeping him calm. Joseph nodded, lips tight. His face didn't cry, his voice didn't break. But the tremble in his fingers told the truth. Marcia took his hand. You're not alone, Joe. He nodded again. He's my only family. In a different wing of the hospital, the staff had hung a military service flag on Shadow's door. Not because anyone ordered them to, but because they felt it was right. Veterans who had heard the story, many of them strangers, started to show up at the reception desk, asking quietly if they could sit with Shadow. By mid-afternoon, the hospital created a sign-up sheet for 15-minute rotations. No one turned them away. Colonel Marcus Landon was one of the first. He entered the room quietly, not saluting, just removing his hat and placing it on the counter. Shadow's chest rose once, then fell. Marcus sat down beside the stretcher and placed a weathered hand gently on the dog's paw. I remember you, he whispered. Louse. 79, you were just a pup with cracked ribs and too much fight in your eyes. Joe carried you on his back for 4 miles, and you've been carrying him ever since. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old photo, faded, bent at the edges. Joseph in uniform, Shadow beside him, tail wagging, head cocked. You were a soldier, Marcus said, voice tight, and you never stopped being one. Shadow twitched slightly. Not much, but enough. Marcus smiled and didn't wipe the tear that slid down his cheek. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. A woman arrived at the hospital unannounced, wearing dark sunglasses and holding a white cane. She walked with confidence and grace, her other hand held gently by a young intern. When she reached the receptionist, she said, I'm Clara Jennings. I'm a civil rights attorney. I represent Mr. Joseph Murphy, and I used to be the little girl who sat in front of him every Tuesday while he read to us in the library. The receptionist stood up slowly. Yes, ma'am. Clara smiled. I'm not here for interviews. I'm here to return a favor. Later at a small press conference, she stood in front of reporters and said calmly, when I was a blind child, Joseph read me stories that helped me see the world better than anyone else. He taught me that trust doesn't need sight, it needs heart. She held up a photo of Shadow in his vest. And this dog, he's the last pair of eyes Joseph has. And he gave them without hesitation. That's not just loyalty. That's love. That's courage. That's American. That night, President Aaron Hart mentioned the story in a speech at a military tribute dinner. Tonight, I want to take a moment to honor not a general, not a Medal of Honor recipient, but a retired K-9 named Shadow, who this week showed the entire nation what it means to serve. The room stood in a quiet, extended applause. In Hamilton, the hospital room was dark except for the glow of machines. Joseph lay with his eyes closed. Then slowly a nurse pushed open the door. Mr. Murphy, she whispered, we have someone here to see you. Joseph opened his eyes. A moment later, they rolled in Shadow, his body still frail, bandages visible, but upright in a stretcher bed modified for canine patients. His eyes were half open, groggy but alert. Joseph reached out his hand. Shadow's ears perked. Barely, but they moved. And when Joseph's fingers touched the tip of Shadow's paw, the old dog let out a sound, half sigh, half breath. The kind you make when you finally find something you lost. Joseph didn't speak right away. He just let the silence hold. Then he whispered, you're not done yet. Not until I say so. And Shadow gave one slow, thumping wag of his tail. Outside, across the country, protests had become vigils. People weren't shouting anymore. They were standing in silence. In San Diego, a row of retired military dogs walked down the pier alongside their handlers, each wearing a black ribbon around their service vest. In Chicago, families with service animals gathered at Millennium Park, holding glow sticks and signs that said, Shadow walk so we could cross. And in Hamlin, a child taped a picture to the hospital window, crayon drawings of Joseph and Shadow in superhero capes standing side by side. Above them in block letters, the words, he saw for him. Inside the ICU, as Joseph and Shadow sat side by side, connected by touch and memory, a nurse asked quietly, Mr. Murphy, what would you like us to do if he wakes up tomorrow? Joseph smiled faintly. If he wakes up, he said, you call the mayor, the governor, the whole damn Pentagon if you have to. Why? Because it means we've got more work to do. He paused. And this time I want them all to see the world through his eyes. On the morning of the ceremony, the sky over Hamilton was crystal clear. No clouds, no wind, just a soft blue dome above a town that had been changed forever. Flags were lowered to half-staff. Schools opened with a moment of silence. Local TV channels had cleared their schedules to broadcast the tribute live. The city had seen parades before. It had hosted festivals, county fairs, and even a 4th of July drone show. But this was different. This wasn't about celebration. This was about remembrance. At the center of Town Square, a modest wooden stage had been built. No lights, no pomp, just a few folding chairs and a large canvas print of a black and tan German shepherd in a navy blue vest. Next to the photo was a smaller one, a white-haired man in sunglasses reading to children in a green-walled library. Between them sat a bronze plaque that simply read, Shadow K9 Veteran Protector, friend, he never left his post. At 10:04 a.m., the sound of boots echoed across the plaza. General Michael Vance, tall, crisp, composed, stepped up onto the stage in full dress uniform. He didn't speak immediately. He looked across the rows of veterans, children, K9 handlers, teachers, librarians, and thousands of quiet onlookers. Then he turned toward Joseph Murphy, seated at center stage with a blanket over his knees and a leash resting in his lap. At the other end of that leash sat Shadow, still graying, still thin, but sitting, awake, alert. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stood, some with hands over hearts, some with hands over their mouths, some just holding their own dogs a little closer. General Vance spoke slowly. I've stood at many podiums in my career. I've addressed troops in desert war zones and laid wreaths at Arlington. But today I come not as a general, but as a witness. He paused, looking at Shadow. This dog did not save one man. He reminded all of us what it means to care, to protect, to trust without question. He turned to Joseph. And this man did not lose his sight. He taught us how to see the things we've been blind to for too long. When the microphone passed to Joseph, he didn't rise. But he didn't need to. His voice, though softer than it once was, carried through the square like a storybook, read aloud on a front porch. I've been blind for 34 years, he began. I've learned to live without seeing faces, without knowing colors. But I've never been without vision. He paused. Because every morning this dog walked beside me. Not behind me, not in front of me, beside me. His fingers gently scratched Shadow's ear. When I lost my brothers in the war, I thought I'd never trust again. When I lost my sight, I thought I'd never belong again. But Shadow didn't care about any of that. He didn't wait for me to be ready. He just showed up. Every day. The crowd leaned in, and last week he took a bullet that was meant for me. No hesitation, no fear, just love. That kind of loyalty, it changes a man. He smiled softly. And I want to say something directly to the officers who pulled that trigger. You made a mistake, a terrible one. But this isn't just about blame. He paused, again, his tone deepening. This is about making sure no other old vet, no blind man, no service dog ever has to suffer like that again. We can do better, and we will. The final speaker was Clara Jennings, the civil rights attorney and former little girl who once sat in the children's circle at the library. She stepped up to the mic, her white cane tucked under her arm. Shadow may not understand what a city resolution is, she said, but he understands one thing better than most of us ever will, purpose. She pointed toward Joseph and Shadow. This was not an isolated incident. This was a crack in the foundation of our trust. And thanks to them, we now have the chance to rebuild it stronger. The applause that followed was soft but sustained, not a celebration of promise. As the crowd slowly dispersed, families approached the stage to lay flowers at the base of Shadow's photo. Some brought dog biscuits, some brought medals. One child placed a plush toy, a little stuffed shepherd, with a note that read, "You saved him." Now I believe dogs really are angels. Shadow lay beside Joseph the whole time, not moving much, but watching. When a boy reached out hesitantly, Joseph smiled. "You can pet him. Just be gentle." The boy knelt down. "Hi, Shadow," he said softly. "I'm going to be good because of you." By Monday, Hamilton had officially renamed the intersection of Elman and 3rd. A new sign was installed, white letters on green, Shadows Crossing. Underneath it, a bronze K9 medallion was bolted into the sidewalk with the words, "He waited for the light so others could see." 2 weeks later, Joseph returned to the library. The children's room was fuller than ever. Not because of the media attention, but because kids had started asking their parents, when does Mr. Joe read again? Shadow entered first, stopping in the doorway like always. Joseph followed with his cane, his steps slower now, his arms still healing. He took his seat, placed the old cassette player on the table, and patted the rug at his feet. Shadow lay down, ears perked. The children didn't speak at first. They just watched. Then one whispered, "He's back." Joseph smiled and pressed play. The room filled with the soft hum of a story beginning, something about a river, a turtle, a quiet hero. And outside the window, the town kept moving, cars passing, people shopping, birds darting overhead. But for a few minutes in one small library, time slowed, and the world listened. Thank you for walking through this story with us, from the quiet morning routines of Joseph and Shadow, to the shot that shook a city and the love that reminded a nation how to see again. Shadow's story is not just about one dog, it's about every animal that gives us their trust without question. Every person who depends on their loyalty, and every community that must choose how to respond when trust is broken. So now we ask you, what does loyalty mean to you? And when the time comes to stand for someone who can't speak, will you? Leave a comment below, share your story, and if this touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, because every hero deserves to be remembered.